some of what I try to discover within the context of my work, inadvertently and some more obviously, is this the notion of what it's like to express from the dark part of your life, the part that's hard, that's difficult, that's emotional, that's intense, that's hard to talk about. But in some sense, it's almost easier to express through what I do. And then the other part of what I try to do too is try to bring something that's positive, something that reveals the spirit, the light, the good things about what you experience in the work. And so part of what I do in my sculpture and my drawing over the last 20 years, especially in the last decade with figurative work, is to explore those two polars, opposites, and see what I can communicate through that. Because I know those are things that everybody goes through. This is a series of portraits cast in aluminum. For all these types of large portraits, myself included, some of my students, I will model them in clay, probably about this large. Then I'll make a large rubber and plastic mother mold of that. And so then I'll have a means to be able to do a number of things with them. So with these, I actually took antique doilies that I found in like flea markets and antique stores and so forth, and then I actually took the doilies and I dipped them in a combination of paraffin wax and like a soft sculptor's wax. So then I took the doily, dipped it in the wax, and I drape it into the mold. And when I drape it into the mold, a lot of times there's a little bitty pockets in the front part of the form that create a nice texture. And so if you look closely at the edge of this piece, you can see the kind of arches of the doily part that's in that. And so I wanted to bring something that's old into something that's new. I wanted to bring something that's about a young person, but I wanted the portrait to feel like it was hundreds or thousands of years old. I've always really been drawn to both beautiful things, but that are really old, and they have a history to them. And the age and the degradation of that form over millennium or years, it gives it a character that makes it richer, but you still see the beauty in it. And so I want to kind of emulate that a little bit. So the idea of using actual doilies is the way to make the texture, and then I come back and I'll finish building the wax up in the back of that a little bit more, and then I'll pull it out of the mold, and then I'll carefully clean it up and prepare it for metal casting. So I'm putting in a large mold that's about 350, 400 pounds. So about this big around, about that tall, like 30 by 30 mold in plaster and sand. I put that into a kiln for 5 days at 1,000 degrees and melts out all the wax and burns out all the doily. And now I have a cavity in this shape in there. Then I pour in molten aluminum, let that cool overnight. Then I'll pull that form out of the plaster and sand. Then I'll clean it up. Then I'll power wash it. And then so this is what I would consider a perfect casting, because I didn't do anything to the front surface. All the texture was there from the doily and the wax. And then I come in with like a rust-colored patina as a base color. Then I come in with a black on top and a little bit of red on there to kind of bring that texture out. So each one of them has like a unique textural pattern that comes from the wax and the doily. And that's what part of what gives it that quality of kind of looking like it's old and degraded and rusting and coming apart, as if you'd unearthed it or had been in the ocean for 1,000 years, and it eroded over time, or coral had grown on it, or it just has that character of age to it that I've always been drawn to.
Well, my name is Kyle Boswell, and I'm the owner of Boswell Mourot Fine Art here in Little Rock and in Miami, Florida. We've moved recently to the Soma district in downtown Little Rock from our Heights location. I've known Michael, I would say, for about 8 years. We met through the local art scene, both at my gallery and at UALR. I really became drawn to his work because of the calmness that it brings about in me personally, and I think most of the viewers that appreciate his work. We've always, my partner and I, have always tried to concentrate on bringing art to Little Rock or within our local artists, things that do represent something that's meaningful and that really reflects maybe the present, in our lives. And I think Michael's work is really conducive with that right now because of COVID and our political situation and the real disconnect in our population. And so having this calming effect, I think, is good. I know it's good for me. But a little bit about Michael's work. I think most people know who he is, especially locally. He's has been very successful, and he's teaching at UALR. And that teaching aspect is another draw for me to his work. I'm really drawn to artists that are able to represent, some type of a teaching philosophy in their work, and I think Michael does that. He has a wide range of different, I don't want to say genre, but different styles of sculpting. His work is broad, but once again, it's really connected, and that's another reason I'm drawn to his work. And I'm just feel really privileged that I'm able to represent him here at our gallery. It's very pleasant.
So I've always been interested in a little bit of archaeology and history and discovering found objects that kind of have a history to them. To me, it's like exploring and going into flea markets and antique stores. I never know what I'm looking for, but I'll find something and I go, wow, what can I do with that? Maybe I could press that in clay, or maybe I could put that in wax and maybe I could get a texture from it. So then there's like the first doilies that I found were antique English doilies from 100 years ago. And I'm like, these are beautiful. I'm going to destroy them. Or I'm going to use them in a way that they weren't intended for. But because of the pattern and the history and what that represents is somebody spending hours and weeks making these very delicate, beautiful little things, and I'm going to transform them into something else, reveal their history in a different way. So growing up in the Midwest and having a grandmother who made doilies, that's part of my history. And that she would spend hours, this is part of what she did, was doing that. And so it's interesting to kind of rediscover that and then do something with it and bring it to today. Taking history and looking at it in a different way and playing with an object and looking at it in a different way. And then creating with something that you didn't expect to create with. Like I was at an antique store the other day. It was Roy Dudley estate sales. Love going over there. And there was a box full of black and white dress gloves. And I'm like, wow. I don't know anything about the history of women's dress gloves. So I started looking them up, and then there's the white gloves are for some things, the black gloves are for others. But I was drawn to them, not just because I didn't know about them, but I was curious about the history, but then what could I do with them? So the idea is I bought the whole box, just like $10. And I want to take them and actually dip them in wax and then put them into a mold like this form is, so that eventually when I cast it in bronze or aluminum, you'll see the pattern of the glove in the face. And so then you go, wow, what does that mean possibly? What could that symbolize? Could that mean this gentle touch that somebody connected to that person? Or does it mean something to do with violence? Or does it mean to do with passing on, an idea to somebody else? So what does that symbol represent to me, to somebody else? So playing with historical objects sometimes I think is intriguing, and interpreting and then reinvigorating them in a different way, destroying them and recreating with them at the same time. I'd say a lot of what I reflect on is what humanity reflects on, and I just try to visualize it. in an interesting way, I hope. I might take some very academic pose, but I try to look at it new in the way that I finish it with color, or the way I bring texture to it, or whether I bring natural forms into it to make it more interesting. But as a visual communicator, I think it's real important to put a lot of thought into what I'm doing in terms of not just understanding the skill in the process, but the final product and what I can communicate in terms of a story that's meaningful to somebody else, not just me. I might do it with a certain intention, and then when it's finished, it's evolved. And then you might interpret it, and it's evolved another step. You might see something totally different from my intent. That's the best part of what can happen, instead of the worst. So.